Bang on Sydney's 2GB 873.
Epilepsy is a condition that's misunderstood by many Australians. Research commissioned by LevaNova Australia found that 1 in 4 Australians did not know the specifics of epilepsy, and nearly 2 in 3 were not aware of drug-resistant epilepsy. On the line to tell us more is Carol Ireland, who's the CEO of Epilepsy Action Australia and a very good friend of mine. Good evening, Carol.
Ross, it's lovely to speak to you again.
It's always lovely to talk to you, my friend. Now, what can you tell us about LevaNova's study?
Well, Ross, it probably confirmed what we do already know in a sense, and that is there's a lot of myth and misconception about epilepsy. Amazingly, it's probably the oldest known medical condition. I think written records go back to 4000 BCE. And we all have heard of epilepsy, but when you get below, yes, I know it exists, there's not a lot of information, not a lot of understanding about what it really is. I think people often think of it as being a seizure. It's a seizure. We see it in the media. Somebody falls to the ground, they convulse, and then they get up and they get on with life. It's a much more complex condition than that, Ross, and we do know there's so much myth and misconception out there.
So just explain to us what the study said and why you're saying it's more complex than just someone having a seizure.
Yeah, sure. So, look, the study told us that, 25% of Australians don't know the specifics of epilepsy. They don't really know what causes it. They don't really know what it is beyond it's a seizure. And around 30% of people said they'd like to know more. But, an interesting part is that around 30% of people with epilepsy have drug-resistant epilepsy. So they actually don't get control of their seizures through medication. And a lot of people think that you have epilepsy, you take a tablet, you'll be okay. And for some people that's the case, but for a lot of people it's not. So, 60% of people were not aware at all of drug-resistant epilepsy.
Right.
And this is where someone's, they've trialled a medication, an anti-seizure medication. They've not responded to that, and they've tried another one. So, they're really not responding to the currently available medications. And I think that the real importance of that is that people understand that there are other treatments, there are other things that they can try and, don't give up.
Well, something that you and I have been heavily involved in over the years is, of course, medical cannabis. And I have to always say that I'm on the board of a company that's developing medical cannabis around the world. So just tell us about the studies with that.
Sure. Well, look, the good news is there's still research going on, of course, new treatments all the time. And medicinal cannabis, I think, is something that as you say, we felt passionate about because it may not work for everybody, but my goodness, for some it makes a difference. It's been known to significantly reduce the frequency the frequency and severity of seizures in children and adults for some people. So really, really important. But look, there's also some things, there's new technologies coming on board all the time. There are surgeries. There's deep brain stimulation. There's vagus nerve stimulation. I mean, a lot of people probably haven't heard of some of these things. But again, the message is don't give up. I think what I'd like to really get across to people is they need to get to an epilepsy centre in a tertiary hospital.
Yep.
That's the key. Not to say that our general practitioners and our neurologists in, across Australia, regional and rural included, aren't great first ports of call, but often people need to get to one of those real epilepsy centres and find out exactly what's available for them.
Now, also you mentioned there epilepsy has, people don't understand the causes, but it does have a variety of different causes. Can you go through some of the common causes of epilepsy?
Sure. Look, it can be genetic. It can and does, sort of occur in families, in multiple family members, siblings, or in some cases, aunts, uncles, parents and so on. We do find that genetic stream.
Sure.
It's also comorbid with a range of other conditions, things like stroke. If anything that can really affect the brain can also cause epilepsy. So brain tumours, whether they be benign or malignant, things like autism, amazingly, and intellectual disability. Often people that have those conditions also have epilepsy. And a really common one, of course, is injury. And that injury can be anything from an injury in infancy, even childbirth, but infancy, all the way through our lives. If we bump our heads, if we have a car accident, if we have a lot of bumps in sporting events and so on, injury at any stage in life could result in epilepsy. So it's interesting that about 60% of people, though, will not know what the cause of their epilepsy is.
Yeah, but we do have effective treatments for the vast majority of people. And I like to think that we're all potential epileptics, but just some people have much lower thresholds to develop epilepsy.
Yeah, good way to think about it, actually. Good way to think about it. And I think that also addresses what, potentially is still some stigma in the community. It could be any one of us. It's a very physical thing that happens. It's a, disruption to the neuroelectrical chemicals in our brain. So any one of us could actually have epilepsy. We need to care for our heads. We need to care for ourselves. But again, I sort of come back to this message of, if you have epilepsy, don't give up. There are treatments, things that are emerging all the time for people with drug-resistant epilepsy.
Sure. And so if people want more information, Carol, what should they do?
Sure, we're happy to be a starting point. Ross, epilepsy at epilepsy.org.au is our website, and people can make contact with us. They can also ring 1300 374537, and what we can guarantee is you'll get an epilepsy nurse at the end of the line. And that epilepsy nurse can sort of give some advice and guidance, and we help both people with epilepsy as well as general practitioners and other healthcare professionals out there, because that's our specialty, is working with epilepsy.
That's fantastic information, Carol, and thank you so much for being on Healthy Living.
Pleasure, Ross. Thanks for raising some awareness, and great to talk to you again.
Good on you. Thanks, Carol.
Thanks, Carol. Coming up on the text line, we've got a text here from Bruce. He's got a joke for you, Doc. And the reason
Bruce has always got a great joke.
He's always got a good joke. But the final word coming up shortly. But Bruce's joke is, never try lying to an X-ray technician because they can see right through you.
Yeah, well, you see, it's similar to the fact that my mother was a radiologist and she met my father in the practice, and I don't know what she saw in him.
Oh, for goodness sake. Healthy Living at 2GB.com. This one's come in from Andy, who says, hi, he's talking about misophonia, which we were talking to Dr. Tanvir Ahmed about in the first hour of the program. He said he has misophonia and it's often debilitating. Most people with it have issues with the sound of people eating. However, there are many other triggers. It's an uncomfortable fight or flight response, and the best way I can describe what happens in the brain, when we hear a trigger sound, it's like mental torture. For example, he says one of his triggers is whistling, and if a whistling advertisement comes on the radio, he's got to switch the volume down really fast. So he said it's not a volume issue so much as a specific sound that affects him. So very good point, Andy, and I'm sorry that you're suffering from that, but thank you for sharing.
Well, maybe I have the same thing with some of the commercials that I have to listen to. So
we won't mention any names.
No, we won't.
And now on Healthy Living, it's time to uncover the body of evidence.
Now, you want to talk about depression tonight?
Yeah, this is really, really interesting. This is out of Wuhan University. So Wuhan, where allegedly COVID started, published in a journal called Cell Metabolism. And this was a study of premenopausal women and looked at the link with gut bacteria. Now, interestingly, the first part of the study was they took premenopausal women versus women who didn't have who were premenopausal but didn't have depression, and they found that the women who were depressed had a 43% reduction in estradiol, which is the primary female premenopausal hormone. And then they looked at the gut bacteria in these women and found that there was a predominance of a thing called Klebsiella origenes. And then they took the Klebsiella and put it into mice and found that the mice that were given the Klebsiella showed depression-like behaviours. And then they treated the mice with antibiotics to get rid of it and found that the depression behaviours lifted. So what we're talking about is the potential here for